Should the NFL be worried about what these emails could reveal?
Sure, they should be, because you see people in positions of power and influence who feel a certain way. One of the things that I'm not going to be a part of, however, is that here's the best way I can put this, guys, Molly, Dan. You got to make it count. Okay. You see, we got to call racism out when we see it. We got to call out xenophobia when we see it. Anti-gay behavior when we see it. Misogyny when we see it. We got to do all of those things. But in the same breath, we can't always reach for it when it ain't there, because then you dilute the argument when it really, really, really matters. See, when you stand up and everything's about racism, now we got a problem. Because when real racism shows its head, people are numb to it because you've been talking about race all along when it might not necessarily have been warranted. I have been in situations throughout my career covering the world of sports where I saw some racism, but for the most part, I saw individuals who were disliked because of their behavior. No, you saw me on the air on several occasions, Dan, where I would express or explain, and Molly saw this, where I would say, no, that's not race. They just don't like your ass. You got to be able to point that out. When you late all the time, or you do what you want to do, or how you want to do it, and you don't want to answer to anybody, and rules and regulations are not applicable to you in your mind that are applicable to everybody else, that's not race. That's you. And so for me, it's incredibly, incredibly important that while me being a black man, and a very proud black man that will not hesitate to call out racism, racial insensitivities, bigotry and stuff like that, when I see it, I gotta see it. Yeah. I can't assume it, because when you assume it, if you miss, then all of a sudden it dilutes the argument. I'm not implying that DeMaurice Smith did that with Bomani Jones, because DeMaurice Smith is the executive director of the Players Association. The man knows what the hell he's talking about. Now, there have been times where I wish his relationship with Roger Goodell is better. And there have been times where I looked at his relationship with Roger Goodell and said, you could have done some things to improve that relationship.
And he was the ire of horrific comments. Let's make that clear. He was also... Right. Yes, and part of these emails.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm not trying to say that he
I'm just saying make sure the audience knows.
The audience knows.
Yes.
He was the one.
He was targeted.
He was targeted in the email. It's important to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely.
And he comes from a position of substance, not just because of his position, but because of his accomplishments as a black man, what he has witnessed, what he has seen. And I stand with DeMaurice Smith, and I got a lot of respect for him. I'm just saying, let's make sure that we're careful when we're talking about the NFL. The owners might be somebody that you want to talk to. You might even want to talk about some GMs in that fashion. But there's a whole lot of personnel who happen to be white in the NBA, in the NFL, and various other sports that don't think like that. So let's be careful not to paint folks with a broad brush, because I damn sure don't want them doing it to me.
And to be clear, you're also saying it's more strategic when you're picking your spots.
That's right. You gotta pick your spots.
And picking your battles so the argument isn't diluted and it's more poignant. And again, I just want to reiterate, DeMaurice Smith, not only was he called unintelligent, but his facial features were criticized during this investigation into the Washington football team by John Gruden.
And he is anything but unintelligent.
No, he's a class act. I had the pleasure of meeting him, when I was with NFL Network. Dan?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a good word from Stephen A. I think the thing that stands out with Stephen A's comments for me is when he says we got to call it out, right? When we see it, we have to call it out. And candidly, guys, like, I don't think we can call it out. And I know I couldn't or was incapable of it until it mattered to me as much as it mattered to somebody else. You know what I'm saying? And I think, again, speaking from somebody that spent so much time in a locker room, when I saw my teammates, and these are guys that I grew up with, and how much it impacted them, then it started to resonate to me that my brother was being impacted or it was hurting him. Until we get to the point of learning about it, you know what I'm saying, Stephen A? Like, learning that that's my brother that's hurting because of whatever, the misogyny or the homophobia or the racism. I got to learn how that hurts him and impacts him for me to want to call it out in all facets of every walk of life. And these are guys that Alfred Fincher, a guy that I played college football with, to my brother Marcus Spears or Ryan Clark, the guys that I work with now. And I mentioned the Raiders locker room with Carl Nassib. You got to realize how much that stuff impacts him, and then realize that that's your brother, and if it impacts him in a certain way, it's got to be impacting to you in a certain way. And then that's got to empower you and give you the courage to call it out when you do see it. And ever since, not ever since, but a lot of over the past couple of days, my mind has gone in relation to the emails from John Gruden to Peyton Manning's Hall of Fame speech. And near the end of Peyton Manning's Hall of Fame speech, he talked about the game of football and the preservation of the game of football and its future. And for me, somebody whose life has been impacted beyond words from the game of football, I think it's incumbent upon all of us that are associated with the game to make sure that there's nothing nor anyone that can negatively impact the growth of the game and the future of the game and the impact of the game. We got to make sure that everybody in relation to that are associated with the game of football. Yes, they should no longer be a part of the game of football, and that includes the NFL.
Yeah. I want to say this real quick, and I want to say this to you, Dan, and I want to say this particularly as a black man to white America. And I'll close by saying this. If we're pointing to racism, racial insensitivity, bigotry, and things of that nature, and that's not how you feel, and that's not how you act, we're not talking about you. I think the mistake a lot of white folks make when it comes to issues of race is that they personalize it. Because when you're talking about the actions of a white person, white folks are up in arms to come to their own defense as if you're talking about all white people, when in fact we are not doing any such thing. What we're saying is, there it is. And so join us in pointing that out so we'll understand and be reminded of the fact that all of us don't think alike. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.